Hi everyone, and welcome to another workshop during the Risk Awareness Week. I thank you for your participation, and I highly encourage, just like I did in all the other workshops, I highly encourage to keep this interactive, ask questions, have chats in the comments below with other participants, share your thoughts. You don't have to agree or disagree with everything. You use this opportunity to have a proper discussion with us, with other participants. And remember, if you think this session is useful or you wish your HR or your finance department would have seen it, we'll just share the replay with them. The replay is free. Watching this session is also free. Use this opportunity to help raise risk management awareness. And for this workshop, I want to present Benoit Ledusser. Is that the correct name pronunciation? Sorry about that. Benoit is the Senior Risk Manager for the Enterprise Risk Management in Via Rail Canada. And today he has an amazing case study to share with you. So over to you, Benoit.
Thank you so much, Alex, for the introduction and the invitation. I think Risk Awareness Week is a great thing to move the discipline forward. We've got to be less voodoo and more science, actually. So should be a fun day today. First of all, I'll say a very Canadian thing. Basically, I'm sorry for my English. I'm going to try to cut down the French accent as much as I can. Hopefully, you get what I'm trying to pass over to you. Basically, I'm wondering, is risk management in a rut? Are we so focused on the governance and the procedures and the process and not enough on the actual usefulness of risk management? When's the last time an executive asked, I need to take a business decision, rush, give me the risk register. I needed to take that decision. Even worse, when's the last time you've heard a risk manager actually pulling out a heat map for a personal decision? Like, let's say you renew your mortgage and you're wondering, should I go fixed rate or variable rate? Are you taking a heat map or a risk register to do that? No, you're taking a look at how the rates may evolve, what's my capacity to pay, what's the benefit, and then you take your decision. So really, risk management should be less about the actual process and more about actual decision making. And I'll show you a quick presentation on how it was done on a specific business situation we had at the corporation. And then we can talk a little more about the side of why should we focus more on tools and the analysis rather than the process.
Perfect. So over to your presentation now.
Here was our business problem. Montreal is a great city, but with the problem of any city built on an island, traffic is a plague. And by this I mean that if you're going to play a full-scale version of the Königsberg Bridge problem in Montreal, you're likely to die of old age. So people, like in many cities, commute using trains, buses, and subways. There's currently a large urban transit project that will in the long run improve people's mobility. That project is the REM, which is the French acronym for Express Metropolitan Network. It will be great in the long term, but during the few years of construction, let's be frank, will be a nightmare for folks from at least two train lines, the Mascouche line, which is the one here in purple, and the Deux Montagnes line, which is here, both stations connecting downtown Montreal. And as a business with both a headquarter and a station in downtown Montreal, a flag was raised that this could be a challenge for talent attraction and retention, especially in the current job market, which is very good with a lot of opportunities for good people. So it was decided to assess this risk in order to see what its severity before we could consider if we should deploy mitigation actions. That's risk management at its best, using risk in order to inform better decision. So we could have gone with multiple methodology. For example, we could have done a risk analysis using purely arbitrary statements like high likelihood of a high impact. By itself, this is worthless. We could have gone with a risk analysis using a risk matrix with statement like we have between 20 and 50% chance of seeing a voluntary turnover rate of, let's say, 5 to 10% of the staff working in the impacted locations. Once again, not that useful. Or we went with option 3, using some quantitative methods to extrapolate an outcome based on plausible and documented assumptions. Now I know you may think, wait a minute, you want to do a quantitative risk analysis on something that's fluffy and fuzzy like a bunch of human brains that will be facing a situation that they never encountered before? Are you nuts? Well, I'll show you how we've done it. For a fair warning, nothing in there is super sophisticated. And just about any risk manager should be able to do this, or likely better. It's the result of about 3 or 4 hours of work, maybe one from a small team of HR specialists that provided insight and data, and the rest done by the risk guy. The second warning is that, yes, I've leveraged some tools along the way, such as Power BI, R, and At Risk, but don't get hung up on them. There's multiple ways to skin a cat, so everything I'm showing you today could be done in vanilla Excel, in R, Python, or if you're courageous, you could take 500 interns, give them dice, and do the same thing. You don't need expensive software. Model Risk by Vos provides a very strong solution with a lot of possibilities in a free edition, and you don't need to code like if you do the same in R or Python. Frankly, between this, R, Python, you can do some pretty amazing things for free. So, we've started by setting the scope of the exercise to what's the potential impact of this project on our workforce. As this was to inform management without disturbing all concerned employees because, well, let's be frank, they fill too many surveys, it was decided that a quick analysis should be conducted to see if we should explore further with things like surveys or interviews. We just wanted initially to outline if this was something material to bring to the executive agenda or not. So what are the parameters we needed first? We need to know how many employees are potentially impacted by the project, in this case without issuing a survey immediately. We also needed to know what are the risk factors that would modify the likelihood and the consequence of an employee leaving. Instead of grabbing them as a bunch, we took a more individualized approach. So we didn't know who take the train, but based on the team's knowledge, we knew that many employees commute this way. The train is quick, comfortable, very convenient. So no surveys. How do you assess the potential pool of staff that's at risk? What we had is employee files, including multiple variables such as home address, work location, performance ranking, position criticality, years of service, etc. Just to reassure you, this data was anonymized and only HR kept the key. I didn't need to know who was whom. I just needed to know that someone in that postal code was potentially exposed. It's important to protect data privacy. And same thing today, I will show you some later example. I'll only show you the specific of a totally fake employee. So in order to understand who was potentially impacted by this project, we've used Power BI to see who was in the danger zone. So this is Power BI. It's a Microsoft tool that's used for data visualization and exploration. You can do some light analytics in there, but it's mostly for dashboarding. The nifty thing with it is that it's very intuitive. You can just click and drag data in there. And once you set up your visualization, if you click, for example, you want to see the who's impacted on the Mascouche line, I could go and see impacted line, pick the Mascouche one, just click on it, and it's going to filter the visualization based on the decision I made. So initially, we just used that in order to properly understand who was potentially exposed to this risk. So we put all the employees, and then with discussion with HR, we said, okay, those people would not take the train. Those people might take the train. So we basically worked that up until we had the data set that you see here. It was useful because then we exported the data out of it and we filtered basically on the postal code, because here, if I zoom in, those are actual people living in postal code. So I don't have the exact street address of the person. I just need to know that someone is here. And that way we were able to write up the data set that we've used for further analysis. So that was just really for some triage, but you can do more using Power BI if you want. Maybe Microsoft will send their secret police after me, but I can say that Tableau would be doing the same thing. You can do the same thing with R, with Python. So you don't need to use Power BI, but Power BI was available for the corporation, and it was really useful in that case just to get a better understanding on who's the population at risk before we could start taking a look at what are the variables behind what would make someone stay or what could make someone leave. So not everyone has the same likelihood of leaving. We had to think about what are the things driving this risk. And this is where I love my job, because I get to work with smart people. I often say I'm used to be the dumbest guy in the room, because I'm always working with highly skilled specialists that gives insight about their field of expertise. I've worked with geologists, with engineers, with human resources personnel, finance people, social media specialists, customer service people. You always learn. Well, my better half would likely say I don't need to be in a room full of smart people to be the dumbest guy in it, but that's another issue. The important thing is I don't know much about human resources processes, and I don't know much about what makes people tick. So HR staff have been invaluable in order to identify those key factors, which we'll discuss in the next portion of this analysis. The key factor we came up with are, for example, we broke it down in likelihood and impact. For likelihood, we decided that the key factor was someone who had young dependents, so kids, because with daycare, it's hard to add an hour and a half of commute. We talk also about people that had little time with the company, so just a few years invested in, which means that they're not captured yet that much by the pension plan. We also had the factor of the impacted train line. We know that the De Montagne line is much worse than the Mascouche line for the impact, so we rated that criteria higher. Also, we thought about, is the employee mobile on the market? So that's defined by performance level. If you're good at your job, it might be easier to find another job elsewhere. We talked also about the eligibility for the pension plan, because if you're already ready to retire and then you see that this extra hurdle of longer commute time, you may say, well, that's not worth it, I'm leaving. So there's the factor we discussed for likelihood. For impact, we kept the high performer one. So basically, if someone with the highest performance will have a bigger impact. And we also use critical position that we have mapped out. Basically, for us, critical position is something that's key to our operation, and it's not something you can find easily on the job market. So yes, I know it looks a little bit like a heat map because we're talking about impacts and likelihood. But if you take a look at the graph, you'll see that every single dot is someone. And the color code is basically the performance level in that case. The shape is which train line the person is taking. And yes, I know it doesn't look like we have a lot of high performer because our critical position, because this is pretty sparse as far as those two quadrants are concerned. But it's because here we have a mix of unionized and non-unionized employees, and unionized employees are not getting ranked that way. So this is why we have more people here. But I assure you, Via Rail's got very good people working for it. So basically, what we've decided is create 4 quadrants with high impact, high probability, high impact, low probability, low impact and high probability, and low impact and low probability. And that's a good way for us to see how people are distributed based on their likelihood and impact should they leave. One key thing here is, as a first step, I don't know who those dots are, but HR does. They have the key. So they can contact managers, for example, to start thinking about plans, either for groups of people or for individual, in order to accommodate them. So we increase the likelihood that they're going to stay with us and keep helping us reach our objectives. So that's a first thing. This is why this is already better than a heat map. Because you can use that to take better decision, and that's the whole point of it. That's been done through R, so that graphic is done through the ggplot2 package in R. Once again, it's a free software. We also used R to run some statistical testing on the data set we had, because we took a look, for example, of employees that were living in those areas where they're at a higher risk to leave the corporation early, for example. So we did a couple of statistical tests in the background, nothing earth-shattering, nothing super significant. But at least it helped us in this case. The next thing we done is we could have stopped there. I mean, it's already a start because you can communicate that to a board or execs and say, well, okay, you've got those people. We always say we want to retain our top performers, but here how many are that we consider the high risk of leaving. We could have stopped there, but we decided to go further in order to better support decision making about this. So we took the data at the back of this graph. There's basically a database at the back of this, and we decided to run a Monte Carlo simulation using that and some further discussion with HR. That's the next thing we'll take a look at together. So it's time for the Monte Carlo simulation. So we've put the data in Excel because the software I'm using is At-Risk from Palisade, meaning that it's an add-on to Excel that extend the possibility of Excel, especially for Monte Carlo simulation, and anytime you want to put distribution in one of your model. So basically here I've got the data. This is the fake employee line, but at the bottom I've hidden the actual data. So if I open this up, you see that all those lines have been blacked out. But if I click, for example, here you see that I've got data beneath this, basically stating where the person is living and all that good information. I'll just hide it back because we don't need to see the real data for today. Let's take a look at the variables. So this is the data set that we got out of R. So you get basically an ID. That's the secret ID from HR, so they can figure out who's whom. The person still active, living in Laval. This is the postal code of the person. That person is taking the Deux Montagnes line, the Deux Montagnes line. The person's got dependent, 3 of them. 6 years of service, and once again we did code the variables at the back, so some variables are worth more than others in order to establish which quadrant the person is. For example, someone tagged as a critical employee it's a higher impact than just someone who's a okay performer, for example, obviously. That person is not eligible for pension during the construction of the project. If they got good risk management, hopefully they will be done by 2025. Which mean that in this case, the person will not be able to retire before. It's a male. We don't use that variable in the model, but we could have it if we would have thought that it would make some sense. The person is middle management, so non-unionized. The person's got a very good talent review with as seen as an emerging talent in our categorization, so that's good, and that's worth a point in the likelihood and the impact scale. The person is in a critical position, so here we are at critical. When we take a look at the number we've associated it with, it's 2. The person works in HQ. So basically, all those are the information taken out of the HR database, and here is us calculating where the person is for likelihood and impact, so which quadrant. So we see which trigger the person has. Then we evaluate the cost of replacement. So that's obviously a fake salary, but it gives an idea about how the whole thing works. So we start with the salary of the person, and now we had to discuss how do you evaluate the cost of replacing someone? And we didn't have internal data, but a little bit of research gave us general market numbers. Basically, we're saying that to replace a frontline employee is about 6 months of wages. That would include recruiting a new person, loss in productivity, ramp up of the new person, all the administrative costs of getting someone in. So that's 6 months for a frontline employee, and it goes up to 18 months for an executive. So we're somewhere in between for most employees. So what we decided is we had the chat with HR, and they were agreeing that, okay, it's about 6 months for a frontline employee. It's about 9 months for a middle manager. It's about 12 months for a senior technical specialist or for a high management, and it would be 18 months for an executive. So this is what we have here in this case, because it reads middle management, we gave it a value of 9 months, so 0.75 year of wages to replace that person should the person leave. Next step is to evaluate what's the likelihood of the person leaving. And we've done it by quadrant. So basically with HR, we sat and we had discussion based on their expertise and their experience. And we decided, okay, well, what are the likelihood of departure per quadrant? We could have went with a firm value, like a single point, like 20%, let's say. But we didn't feel completely at ease because there's some variability. So we decided to model it as a distribution. So basically the percentage of someone leaving in a quadrant is a triangular distribution. In this case, it means that I've got the minimum likelihood that we see that that person takes the train and would leave is 25%. The high value here would be 55%, and the median, or what the most likely value in the triangular distribution, would be 35%. So here, those parameters are part of my distribution. So basically, at risk gives you the possibility to define distribution in your model and to provide outputs. So basically what we have here is a triangular distribution using the parameter we just discussed. So every time there's going to be an iteration of the Monte Carlo, it's going to put a value there from that triangular distribution with the parameter we just discussed. Correlation-wise, we decided not to put any correlation. Correlation are important because they will broaden your risk distribution. That means that more people are likely to stay or more people are likely to leave at the same time. So you take some of the values, it doesn't change. But in our case, we decided not to do it for the reason of we couldn't really tell if people would leave in group because other people were leaving. So we assumed that we're all selfish. That's once again an assumption. You carry assumption in your model. So we say no correlation between departures. What we have then is a binomial distribution, which is a kind of a coin toss, but with a funny coin. So basically what we're doing is we're saying that for every iteration of the Monte Carlo, it will take a look at the probability here run a random number to see if the person leaves or stays. And then it's going to give a 1 if the person leaves and a 0 if the person stays in the corporation. So at the end, I've got the value here, which is a formula of did the person leave or not, so that's AX2, times the number of months I'm going to need to pay to replace that person, times the salary of the person. All of this could have been wrapped up in a single cell. It's easy to do with any good software, but you get into nested statements and things that are more complicated. And frankly, if you're the only person putting its big nose in the model, it's not an issue. But if you have to explain the model and be transparent about it, it's easier to, I find, to lay things out in separate cells and then explain it step by step like we've just done it, instead of trying to show nested statement with parenthesis and trying to get everyone to understand this. Once again, your model should be easy to understand by other people whenever possible, especially really simple models like this. So what we have is we have that same calculation done for every employee in the database, and we end up with a sum of all the employees. So every iteration, it will take a sum of all the costs of people living or staying in the corporation. If you're wise, you might see that there, I multiply this by a factor. This is just a random number I've hidden somewhere else in the file, so you don't see our actual numbers, just to keep something private. So BT2 is going to remain a secret, but it was not part of the original model. That's just for the demo we're taking a look at. So we've got the model. We've got our assumptions in. Everything's documented. Let's run it to see what insight we can gain out of that Monte Carlo simulation. So now that the model is set up, let's run it. Typically, we run more than 5,000 iteration, but I'm just going to try to keep this one short this time. So basically what the computer will do, for people not familiar with Monte Carlo simulation, it will pick for each distribution in the model is going to pick a value based on the distribution. And here we are, we have the potential exposure of the corporation to the losses. So let's take a look first at the employee. So basically we know that the employee will have between 25 and 55% chance of leaving us with an average of, a median, sorry, of 35%. So basically here we are, we're saying that the expected value of the distribution is around 38%, so that makes sense. So in most cases, that employee costs 0, but when he's leaving, he's costing around, precisely $75,000 to replace. So that's one employee would have this for every employee. But what gets interesting is when we take a look at the sum of all those losses, because this is where you get actual power of to predict things. So let's take a bigger look. Basically, what we're saying here is we've got 90% chances that the losses, according to the model, will be between $1.933 million and $3.717 million. So this is the range of values that 90% fall here. What I can do with this now is figure out what's my best case scenario. Well, best case scenario we have here is 900,000 basically dollar of losses, and the worst case that the model can come up with, and once again that's if the model is a good reflection of reality, is $5 million in replacement of personnel. That's quite interesting. What I could do is, let's say I find it's going to cost me $3 million to rent office space closer to people's location, and I want to know, does that make sense? So I'll just change that here. I'll just change that here for now. And let's say I want to know what's the likelihood of us that it will cost less than $3 million. So I'm going to put 3 million here. So I've got here basically $3 million. I've got 66.4% chance of being under that 3 million, and only about one case out of 3 which would be higher, which means maybe it makes no sense if the rent is that expensive. Let's say it costs me 2 million to mitigate that risk. So I'm putting in 2 million. If the rent is 2 million, I've got 93.3% chance that I will actually be saving money. because I'm going to keep more people on board, and there's only 6.7% chance that I've wasted some money because I would not have needed to put that money in here. So we always wonder, what should we do to mitigate the risk? But you need to cost that. You need to do a trade-off to see, is it worth it or not to do it. This enables you to do such thing in order to take better decision. You can measure the likelihood of success of making profits. You can use that for technical system as well, for more health and safety risk analysis. If you got multiple controls with likelihood of failures, there's a lot of application of Monte Carlo simulation, and you need to be careful. There's a lot of traps that you can fall into and methodological mistakes you can do, but it's going to beat heat maps, that's for sure. So overall, what we've done is first decided not to go with a heat map. We decided to go with better tools. So that was the first step, and it's a very important step. Second one is we got experts around the table with some data in order to have the discussion about the potential risk. We figured out the scope of the problem. We came up with a tailored methodology specifically aimed at this problem, because one size does not fit all. You need the right tool for the right job. So you cannot just apply the same type of analysis to every problem you have. We used Power BI to figure out who was potentially impacted by this project. We used R for some statistical testing and some visualization, because we can all use a little bit more science in our day-to-day. We created a new data set with values for the risk variables that we came up with around the table with the experts. We used this as a basis for a simple Monte Carlo simulation that we ran and were able to provide the value out of it. And we gained enough insights to put this issue on the map. And we followed up by a survey and further action. So this is still an ongoing situation. Did we follow ISO 31000? Yes, kind of, because ISO is so high level that you can use it for good and you can use it for evil. But you got to remember, for me, the high level stuff, it's often not as useful as the analysis itself, supporting decision making. Risk management does not exist for its own sake. Risk management serves the business. It's not the other way around, right? An analysis like this on something as core as having the right staff to keep on achieving your business objective, it's better doing an analysis like that than say, yes, I can prove that I've conducted a yearly review of my ERM framework or a quarterly review of a risk register, because by then it's too late for it to be useful. This is where we need to go and to move as a discipline. Don't get hung up or put too much focus on the process itself. We need to make ERM work.
Thank you for this wonderful presentation. Let's try and summarize it. What are some of the key takeaways you want people to take away from your presentation today?
Well, definitely one size does not fit all. It's nonsense to try to use a risk register approach to just about any business problem you have. So you really need to tailor the tools and tailor the analysis to your specific problem. It can be building a model, it could be using machine learning, using statistics. There's multiple ways to go about it, but none of them are just sticking to heat maps and basically with risk register. One of the issue with the process is that we want it to be auditable, right? This is one of the things. Most ERM right now is compliance-based. The boards wants it, the execs wants it, regulation sometimes wants it. Trouble is when you're doing it so compliance-based, basically you have auditors that are not necessarily subject matter expert coming in. So the approach they take is basically a checklist. So check, you have a policy, you have a framework, you have procedures, you have a risk appetite, you have a risk register, you have, let's say, a treatment plan list where everything is on track.
Risk reports are quarterly, check.
Yeah, exactly. And then you can say, I've passed my audit while delivering very little values to the business. As long as we're focusing too much on the process, and I'm not against ISO or COSO, I mean, they're good framework. They can provide insights. Yes, you need some type of governance, but you got to minimize the time you pass on governance. And Alexis, you're often referring to risk management type 2 versus type 1. It's a little bit like in data science and visualization, we talk about the data to ink ratio. So the useful stuff versus the not so useful, the clutter, the confusing part. Same thing with Nate Silver and his signal and the noise. You want to focus on the signal, not the noise. And RM2 is the actual signal you're trying to gain value out of. So that would be one of the key takeaways is you need to tailor the tool to what you're trying to do. And don't think execs are done. I mean, often I hear execs will not be able to understand the output from a Monte Carlo simulation, but that's nonsense. They're there for a reason. And I think it's kind of insulting saying that they can't understand that stuff. Don't you think, Alex?
I totally agree. I mean, in fact, when I showed the results of the simulation we've done on the business strategy to the CEO, who was the ex-deputy prime minister of the country, a good economist, but nowhere mathematician, he said, finally, it makes sense to me the way it looks and the way it communicates the messages. Finally, I get it. And he hated heat maps. I mean, I was kind of lucky. My CEO hated heat maps passionately. He was saying, what is this telling me? How am I going to make a decision based on, colored bubbles? And he said, finally, it makes sense. I completely agree with you that I think it's just a myth that risk managers made up to blame executives that they don't understand simulations. I mean, every single CFO does scenarios. Every single investment executive knows how sensitivity works. It is so inherently simple to understand that uncertainty makes things volatile that I really don't believe we would have too much trouble with that.
Yeah, precisely. And I like the fact that talk about simplicity. The example I shown you was not a complex simulation involving actuaries and tons of data. It was people around the table having a good discussion, listing the assumption clearly, being transparent about them, and doing the Monte Carlo. It's possible. And if you're an exec or if you're a manager, a board member listening to this, ask more of your risk manager. That's what I have to say. If they're only providing risk register, they should be doing more for you to help guide the business to take better decision, basically.
And this is a very powerful message. And I want everybody, every decision maker who's watching us now, to really kind of take it on. Ask more from your risk manager. If the risk manager is just giving you quarterly risk reports, they are useful for auditing purposes, for S&P, for Moody's, for Fitch, for your insurance company. They're useful, and you can still make money by showing those documents. But are they helping you make the type of decisions that you have to make every day? Are they giving you additional, new, surprising information that you didn't realize to help you make decisions? And I mean, we in the risk profession, we kind of know the answer that they probably don't. But that's why we have better tools. That's why we have better methodologies to give you insights that are not obvious to a human. I mean, the biggest takeaway for me was I once did a risk analysis on the plant modernization. And to everyone's surprise, we realized that the strategy that the business was going with was not going to add sufficient value. And in fact, it actually wasn't going to save the business from bankruptcy. So they ended up settling for a completely different strategy. And risk analysis helped to simulate and highlight whether it would or wouldn't work. And everybody was kind of surprised that it was never going to work. But everyone was so passionate for 6 months. They were going, we're going to do this and that and that. And then we've done a calculation in literally a week and said, well, none of that is going to help you. You better think of something else. And they ended up doing something completely different.
And you mentioning time is an interesting thing, because most of the time when I hear people saying it's going to take too long to do a proper risk analysis for a project. Well, first, if you don't do it, you risk the project itself or the business strategy. And the other thing, it's not that much longer. The example we've shown you today took a few hours of time. And I'm ex-military, so risk management is part of how military personnel operates, because everything is a risk. Snipers, IEDs, artillery, you always think about the risk. You don't get a heat map. What you do is you take all the information, the intel you have, you update your probabilities and your plan based on what you have. It's not something that takes time. I've done risk assessment while getting shot at, because you need to take the best decision. So it's not a matter of taking too much time. It's a matter of, it's worth it to take enough consideration and get that system to thinking a little bit in order to get a proper decision out of it.
Which is another very powerful point. Essentially, I mean, if we kind of really boil it down, risk management is a simple trick to switch our brain from system 1 thinking to system 2 thinking, using Kahneman's terminology. And switching to system 2 thinking is much harder than it seems. It's not a matter of let's have a wonderful chat and let's move sticky notes around or let's color bubbles. And that actually does not switch system two thinking on. You have to, drill down into what the assumptions are. You have to challenge assumptions. You have to decompose a complex problem into much smaller logical pieces so our brain begins to comprehend. But we are not that advanced at analyzing as human beings. We're not that advanced at analyzing complex situations. So we need any kind of assistance we can get. And risk management too has a lot of in the tool set that we can use.
Definitely. And last thing is, how do we get out of, right now we're stuck in the positive feedback loop from hell. Basically, we have people using standards, which are vague. And like we were saying, we're lazy. So if the standard is vague, ISO is not asking for Monte Carlo simulation, for example. People go the easy route. And the solution peddlers selling software, I'm not talking about simulation software, but the ERM software, they'll sell their solutions for qualitative methods, and then you have the auditor go and say, okay, the qualitative methods are enough. And then you have people teaching this in school, and then you have consultants using that. And we need to break that feedback loop that just go increasing. And the way we do that is by having things like Risk Awareness Week, when you have people trying to push against that those old notions that a risk register is enough.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I mean, this is the whole week dedicated. So make sure you share those workshops with the people that you think will benefit from this alternative approach, because there are people on the planet that have been doing exactly this for hundreds of years, for decades, that have been using proper risk analysis to help make decisions. And you don't have to reinvent the wheel. I mean, none of the tools that we're using, I mean, Monte Carlo, the fact that we simulate, that was done since 1946. I mean, it's embarrassing how old our tools are. I mean, I wish we had something new and amazing, but the only difference is that now we can do it in seconds in Excel, and some of the software is even free, which is mind blowing. So there's absolutely no reason not to do it. But yeah, it's bizarre. And I mean, external parties, unfortunately, like regulators and the national institutes and other associations have a huge role to play. I mean, I think it was David Vossi who, in his article, quoted from some of the, yes, it was him. He quoted from some of the maturity models, which literally say, hey, having just qualitative risk assessments is more than enough. I mean, this is just, I think it's negligence and incompetence, and it's horrible that we have people, claiming those things, because, there's Douglas Hubbard, who, with his team, has done extensive research, which suggested that claim is simply not true. That is not true.
Precisely. So once again, thanks a lot, Alexis, for organizing the whole week. I think it's pushing the discipline away from magic and more towards science. So that's always a good thing. And thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. And I once again encourage everyone to ask questions and write in the comments underneath. And we'll see you in the next workshop.
Finally, Alexis is gone and I can hijack this webinar. I'd like to say that I'll present you a gag reel of this webinar, maybe to get a few laughs and finish on a good note. But instead, I propose we tackle together one of the key challenges if you're doing a quantitative risk assessment, especially when you have little data. Basically, getting distributions and probabilities out of gooey masses of neurons, human brains. So if you're feeling a little bit nerdy, please stay tuned, and thank you very much.
Okay, here's a little extra for nerdy folks. One of the questions that is often avoided in textbooks about quantitative risk analysis is how to get the distribution that will feed your model. At first, this was a significant hurdle for me. How do you do it? It looks so simple in the book, but when you're around a table, it's not that easy. If we are to increase the adoption of quantitative methods, we must avoid making them so occult that people are afraid of them. It's a little bit like when doctors and lawyers were talking in Latin, so no one would understand what they do. So let's get back to the challenge of getting distribution for our model. There are multiple ways to do it. If you have data, great. Most quantitative risk management software will come with a distribution fit tool. You select your data, you launch the function, and voila, you know which distribution to use. But wait a minute, was the data representative? Did you have enough of it? What if there's a very material but very rare event that is not part of the data? To take the great Taleb's words, are we in extremistan while using data from mediocristan? Taleb was saying that in extremistan, inequalities are such that one single observation can disproportionately impact the aggregate or the total. Basically, that's like talking about safety incident in a nuclear power plant. Most of them will be small stuff, like someone getting injured or a small failure in a secondary system, a burnt light bulb. But once in a while, you have that meltdown or potential for a meltdown, which will have so much of an impact that it kind of avoid your whole distribution. So if I'm using data which does not contain those potential extreme events, my model is flawed. Using a distribution fit is all right, but you need to ask yourself some questions first about the quality of the inputs. Two other options you can use are to use expert opinion using simple distribution, or to use more sophisticated methods like the Sheffield elicitation framework by O'Hagan and Oakley. Let's start with the case where we have expert and we can reach some consensus on simple distribution like triangular or uniform. Anytime you generate a distribution, you bring assumptions on the table. You must be cognizant of that. Remember that assumptions are required to build a model. They can be wrong, but they're not bad or evil in themselves. You need to be transparent about them though. Build your model the right way, and when you get challenged on your assumptions, you can always adjust them, but always put them out in the open. A key quality for a good modeler for me is honesty. Another point is that the world is not triangular. Not every project or operational distribution is a triangular. Triangular distribution typically fix your lower and upper limits, which can be an issue. And they also may give you a fatter tail than you want on one side of the distribution if it's not symmetrical. A distribution that can be used for a lot of application is the log normal distribution, which is sometimes a better fit. Usually, to set a log normal distribution, you need a mean and a standard deviation to create it. But getting those parameters by talking around a table surrounded by engineers, project manager, operational staff, are you kidding? It's not really easy. And I would not necessarily trust the results. We may be close to identifying a mean when we talk, but to come up with a standard deviation is not something that's intuitive when you're having a discussion about some potential distribution. If you are using a good risk management software, you should have alternative ways to define a log normal distribution, such as using the risk log norm alt from @risk. That was a mouthful. To use those alternate parameters, you need to input some specific data points, and then the software will generate the distribution. For example, you give p-values of 5, 50, and 95 for your distribution. So what's the low case you see happening once every 20 times or less? What is the halfway point? And what's the worst case you see happening once every 20 times? Let's take a practical example, it's going to be easier. Let's imagine that I run an automobile repair shop. I replace engines all the time, but the duration varies according to the model of the car, the amount of rust. I don't know what can happen. If I strip a bolt or anything else, Murphy's Law can bring along. Let's pretend I know my stuff, and then one car out of 20, so that's 5% or P5, will take me 3 hours or less to replace the engine. That's the good day where everything's just working the right way. Let's say usually I can expect that the midway point is 5.5 hours. That means that half the observation will be lower than this, and the other half will be more time to replace the engine than that value of 5.5 hours. Finally, the dreaded complicated car from that exotic country. The car's got a few strip bolts and there's a hard to reach spot behind the radiator to unhook the whole thing. So that car I get once every 20 times. Let's say the time is 11 hours or more. I have those 3 points, and now I can use this to generate a distribution. So this is using @risk in order to generate the distribution. So what I've done is I've opened a cell in Excel. I've actually said create a distribution using a risk log norm alt distribution. And then I've input the parameters that we discussed. So at P5, I've put 3 hours, at P50, 5.5 hours, and at 95, put 11 hours. And this will create the distribution that we need to. There's some issues. Obviously, there's a minimum cap. There's no maximum cap, but it does not mean that maybe I've got a fatter tail on this side. So I still got to be careful about using that. Should not be the worst thing that happens if you're dealing with a car engine in a automotive repair shop. But it can underestimate in some case the likelihood of occurrence of extreme values. So if you're in banking and anywhere near my investment, don't use this, please. For typical small-scale problem we're facing every day in business, this beats heat maps every single time. The last way is similar but slightly more complex. It's the shelf method, so let's take a look at it. First, you need to select good experts that are knowledgeable about the topic. Ideally, they have diverse points of view. You want to limit psychological bias like groupthink and halo effects. Alexis has some pretty good videos about bias and risk management. You should really look them up. It's important when you're doing quantitative work. That's the end of the shameless plug for Alexis. So you have your experts around the table. You then need to train them, not on their area of expertise, obviously, but on the probability elicitation process itself. A little bit like what we're doing right now, showing the steps. It may be good to remind them about potential psychological bias that could impact the process. I know myself during a risk assessment, I often carry psychological bias cards which I actually issue to people when I think they commit them, just in order to keep everyone on their toes and honest. Those psychological bias are important. For example, if we're setting distribution about the potential for a flood and we're just 2 weeks after some major flooding, you may need to tell them about the recency bias, where we focus more attention and put more weight on the latest examples we have or that come to mind. Next step is to provide some unbiased information about the distribution we're trying to figure out. Those can be statistics or qualitative information to give everyone a common base of understanding. But careful, you don't want to set your experts up. You then get the experts to provide individual outputs. It can be done on a sheet of paper or in an app you create. I've done it using SharePoint in the past, where people would just fill a small form and then it collects the information and I can use it in another software. The important thing is they need to do it by themselves, so they don't influence each other yet. This is typically done by having the expert providing some p-values as well as higher and lower limits. You then have a discussion around the values that are proposed. So you have people talking about their point of view and why they came up with those numbers. And eventually, through the discussion, you get to a consensus or a near consensus or a bloodbath if people really disagree. And then if you want to get fancy, you could weight the expert based on the accuracy of past predictions, for example. Remember, you're looking for a distribution though. So it's not the precise value. So talking in range usually makes getting to the consensus easier than if we just need to come up with a specific number. And then when you have your near consensus or your consensus, you document the distributions. There are softwares and statistical packages that can help us with this. Let's take a look at one such package, which is the shelf package in R. We will use it in order to see how we can facilitate discussions around the table to come up with a distribution when we don't have data, because that's the tricky part. And it's very important because if your inputs are wrong, obviously you've all heard about garbage in, garbage out. It's one of those little mantras. Well, it's true. So if your distributions are not working the right way, your output will be meaningless, and even worse, people will have faith in it, because quantitative methods look more robust. They are, if done right, but if they're done wrong and people just get bad numbers, they'll lose faith in them, and you'll crush your business basically. So let's take a look at in R at the shelf package. Okay, so this is R, and I know it's awful looking, and believe it or not, this is improved because I'm looking at it through RStudio at the moment. R is a statistical programming language that's been around for many years. It's basically a way to conduct statistical tests, machine learning, to do web scraping, and a lot of things that you can do in other applications today, but R is working fine for most of my needs. What you see on the top left quadrant is basically the code. On the top right will be the variables and object and data set we're creating or using. Here you'll have some plots. And here you have the code actually being run. So I won't take too much time on how the system works, but what I'll do is I'll load the Shelf library. And Shelf library is basically a series of tools that can support the elicitation process in order to figure out distribution, and that done through collecting information out of experts as opposed as using data. There's multiple ways to go at it. One way you can do it in an interactive fashion using the elicit command. So basically it's going to pop up a small chart with it's an API where you can put limits of your parameter. So let's say that this is my minimum and maximum value. And let's say that I'm gonna ask from my expert to provide a P25, a P50, and a P75 for the distribution. So this is the midway point. This is the point where 25% of the data would be lower of it, and this is the point where you have 75% of the data going above. And then I could take a look at distribution and say, let's say I'm expecting a normal distribution. Well, I'd get the parameters out that I need to input in my software, and let's say at risk or model risk, in order to have a distribution. So you can discuss things through. You could say, no, I think it's more, there's a higher limit. So let's say that the limit is higher. And I don't know, I'll just input some random or semi-random number here. And let's say I'm here. And basically I can say, I think that's distributed in a log normal fashion. Well, that's a peaky one, but you would have your distribution with your parameters you can put in. So that's a first way to do it. If you're doing the full shelf approach, it's a little bit more code, but once again, once the code's there, anyone can use it. Or you could create an API for it, so you don't have all to code in R to be able to do this. The way I've done it in the past is use an online form. People were putting the information in there, and then I was pulling it in. And basically what I have here is setting up the different p-values that the expert will provide. And I'm taking a shortcut this time because I'm going to take the lowest p-value and the highest p-value of all the experts in order to generate my minimal value and maximum value for the distribution. So sorry about the shortcut, but you could just establish them on a table. Just don't like to talk to myself that long. So what I'll do is I'm gonna say to the system, hey, here you are. Those are the p-values the expert will provide. And this is the actual information given by the expert. Here I type it manually. It could be done automatically, but what we have is the 5 p-values I'm asking. That's expert A saying so, that's expert B saying so, and that's expert C saying so. I could have as many experts as I want. And I'm going to basically create a table with that. So I'm just going to pretty it up and add column names and row names so it's easier to figure out. So I'm going to run the code. And here I have expert A with the values it's providing, expert B, and expert C. Next thing I'll do is this would have been done individually so they don't contaminate each other. Next thing I'll do is I would throw this on the wall by projecting it afterward. So I'm going to run the code. And here we go. Those are the 3 distributions the system comes up with based on the values that the expert provided. So we see that expert B is much more confident because his range is narrower, and it's also lower in values because values are the x-axis, and here's the frequency that the data happens in the distribution. So expert B looks maybe too confident and it's lower value, and you have expert C who thinks it's much higher value and he's got about the same spread than expert A. So you can have discussion at that point and fine-tune the parameters until you land to that distribution where everyone agrees with. If people don't agree, it's not something I'd recommend doing, but you can do a mathematical aggregation. So I've run the same code. The only difference this time is that I've added that I want to see a linear pool, so cumulative distribution, considering the 3 inputs from the experts. I still got the same experts, but this provides a cumulative distribution which I could export and use in the model. A couple of flaws with that. The first one is maybe one expert is better than the other. So maybe expert C is the only one really knowing what he's talking about, which means that he's undervalued here because he's a little bit extreme compared to the 2 other ones. So that would be a potential issue of just doing a blind linear pool. Sometimes it works, sometimes it does not. Plus you get some funky distribution to fit at that point. So you still need to use a distribution fit tool on that, because this one looks more like an elephant hiding beneath a carpet than an actual distribution, but it can be used in a tight spot. The important thing is there are ways to take the insights from the expert and put that in your model. And like I said at the start, that was something I was really struggling with for a while, because it's just not that easy. I always felt that triangular distribution are not enough, and not everything can be a uniform distribution, for example. So using better distribution will help us improve your model accuracy and hopefully make enterprise risk management more useful. So hopefully you've learned a thing or two on how to elicit probabilities from experts, which are biased and have all the limitation. They're wonderful limitation, but there's still limitation of our species. So we need to keep that in mind as we build model.
Well, that's it. Thank you very much for listening. And remember that risk management does have ways to improve. Thank you.